Let's focus in a little more now on boundaries. Really, all behavior management is about boundaries, but there are some boundaries that aren't strictly about managing a particular behavior, and we need to look at those a little more closely. One boundary that makes your job easier, and can make your job more stressful if it isn't clear, is the boundary between what's your job and what's someone else's. What is your responsibility as a tutor when it comes to behavior management? Very simply, you are responsible for verbal correction. You have the authority and the responsibility to say something when a kid is acting out and to redirect that behavior. You are the direct support to the teacher in this. They literally cannot do this without you. When it comes to consequences for behavior, authority for that rests with the teacher. Your sole responsibility there is to bring it to the attention of the teacher when a kid is not responding to verbal correction or is doing something major that needs follow-up. It is the teacher's responsibility to decide what, if any, consequences need to happen. So if a child isn't listening to you or is fighting with a friend and not stopping, the best thing to do is to keep it from escalating and pass it on to the teacher. If there's something that seems like it needs consequences or something that you're not sure how to deal with, run it by the teacher and let them decide what happens from there. If a child seems like they're about to melt down and you think, man, they could really use to step outside for a breather, or they're antsy and you think maybe some jumping jacks would really recenter them, you're probably right. Suggest it to the teacher and then go with what they say. The general principle is you have full authority for verbal correction. Any activity that is outside of the normal routine of the classroom, whether that's consequences for behavior or creative solutions for when a kid is feeling off, check in with your classroom lead before you go do it and defer to what they say. The reason for that is your classroom lead is responsible for keeping everyone safe, having an eye on the needs of the whole group, and setting the tone for the room. They're in a unique position to be aware of what's going to be disruptive or helpful, appropriate or inappropriate, safe or unsafe. Checking in with and deferring to your teacher keeps things running smoothly and communication happening. It also keeps you from being responsible for decisions and problems that really aren't fair for you to have to deal with as a volunteer. Another important boundary is that you are a mentor, not a peer. There can be a really fine line between a mentor and a friend, and we of course want you to build rapport with the kids you encounter. But in order for you to be able to effectively guide and help them, they need to see you as an authority figure and not just a buddy. A really easy way to do this is to start from the beginning with calling out the little things. That's not to be mean or picky, that's to get them used to taking correction and taking it from you before it becomes a big thing. If the little things are sliding early on, they won't listen later whether it's big or little. But if you can start correcting from the beginning, they've built up that respect for you by the time you have to ask something harder of them. Remember, you don't have to be a towering authority figure, since you're deferring to the staff anyway. You just need to be more than a peer. If the kids see you early on reinforcing the classroom expectations, that's enough. What we want to avoid is a situation where a kid knows they can ask you and get a yes on something where the teacher would say no. While we're on that subject, here's another important boundary. You have permission to tell a kid no. Full stop. No is a good word. Now, this can be tough because we're trying to keep things positive, and the natural inclination with that is to say yes as many times as possible. We love that instinct. But take some time to consider first what they're asking before saying yes, and be aware that you may need to ask the teacher first. Here are some things to consider. What does the schedule say? If it's academic time and they want to play a game, the answer is no, unless the teacher has given permission for that. If they've finished their academic work early, ask the teacher what they should work on next. Consider also, we want to choose challenges. This is where it becomes important to check in with a teacher before the day begins, or at the very least, check over the child's binder before the day begins, so you can see their finished work and gauge what level they're at. Many kids want to work on what comes easily, which means they're picking things way below their level. It's okay to say no to their choice. If you're uncomfortable with a flat-out no, you can say, let's check in with the teacher on this, or you can directly and positively challenge them.
Man, I'll bet you could breeze through this in 30 seconds. Let's pick something that's going to show off how much you've learned.
Lastly, consider things like, is it disruptive, or risky, or sticky? An example that a teacher gave recently is that a pair of kids wanted to do the day's project on the floor, and the tutors obligingly moved to the floor with them. Now, I probably would have said yes too, because I was a free-spirited theater major and we do everything on the floor. But kids don't always concentrate well on the floor. There's less support for their backs, they're less contained. It's just easier to descend into chaos, especially because it models to the other kids, hey, we don't have to stay inside the usual norms either, for better or worse. In this case, it was worse because the project was using glue. Now, I don't know how you feel about having glue all over a hardwood floor, but even though it was a lovely, nurturing, free-spirited thing to say yes to, and certainly not hurting anyone, it would have been better to check in with the teacher first, who has an eye on things like whether we're going to run out of time, whether we're going to have to clean glue off of hardwood floors, whether we're going to have to wrangle all of the other children back into their spots. No is okay. And teacher input is amazing. Another great boundary is to hold kids to a standard. If the assignment was to write 3 sentences and they've only written 1, push them to write the rest of the assignment before they transition to a new task. When the class is transitioning from one activity to another, they need to clean up what they were working on first. They don't get to move on to the next thing until they've taken responsibility for what's in front of them. Lastly, just for the sake of health, be aware that you'll need some emotional boundaries. One good emotional boundary is to not make promises you can't keep. That's things like, don't worry, I won't let you fail this test. Well, that's not always up to you. Or, I'll always be here for you. You won't be. Not all the time anyway, even if you stay on for years. That brings up another good emotional boundary, which is just to know you're part of the puzzle for this kid and can't solve everything for them. Finally, know that it's not personal if a kid pushes your buttons. Misbehavior is usually about one of 4 things: needing attention, power or revenge, or feeling inadequate. And you'll need emotional boundaries not to get sucked into that with them. When a kid is seeking attention, they often try to find it in really annoying ways. But when you let yourself get annoyed, that's the attention they want, which encourages them to keep doing it. That's why when things need correction, we correct quickly and move on, and we spend much more attention on their positive behaviors. The emotional boundary here is, my attention isn't available on demand, it is mine to give, and I choose to give it to positive things. When a kid is feeling the need for power, it's really easy to let it turn into a power struggle. They're going to be stubborn or shouting or demanding or defiant, and our instinct is to push back harder for those of us who value respecting authority, or to give in for those of us who just can't stand conflict. It's better to take a step back, both emotionally and from the conversation, and give them limited, appropriate choices that let them be responsible for the natural consequences. I was a kid who pushed back on things a lot, and instead of getting mad, my mom would say, you can learn the easy way or the hard way. She let me make my choice and face the natural consequences of my decision. I learned the hard way pretty often, but I learned. In your case, the hard way will often include getting the teacher involved because the burden of setting consequences is just beyond what we ask of you. The emotional boundary here is, I don't need to win this, I just need to keep everyone safe and support the staff. When a kid is feeling the need for revenge, again, it's often not really about you, but they're seeking to get even because of their own hurt that they carry. And you see this when a kid is being intentionally rude or hurtful or violent. And this takes some effort not to take on the hurt that they're trying to give and to keep on being fair and respectful yourself. The boundary here is, I can see this child is trying to get even with the world, but I don't need to get even back. Finally, when a kid is feeling inadequate and wants to give up, our most important job is to not give up with them. Find and point out the things that they're good at. Notice and celebrate their efforts, even the small efforts, and be honest with your praise. Kids can tell when we're lying to them, and false praise will just convince them more that even we don't really believe in them. Kids don't need pity, they need someone to believe they're strong enough. The boundary here is, neither this child nor I are failures if progress is difficult. We're stronger for continuing to try. What about safety boundaries? We've got those too. Let's look first at tutor-child boundaries. We are a no-touch organization. That means we don't have kids sit on our laps. We try and redirect hugs to high fives or fist bumps. We're generally trying to err on the side of respecting the personal bubble. We also never have anyone alone with the child. Even if it's a one-on-one conversation, that needs to happen at the side of the room, or with the teacher's permission, out in the hall with the door open. But there should always be someone who can see what's going on. As awesome as our kids are, we also do not give out personal contact information or pursue friendships with the children outside the program. That includes finding each other on Instagram or Fortnite or whatever the now thing is. In addition to tutor-child boundaries, there are also some child-child boundaries in place. These are there to keep every participant safe and happy by preventing bullying and peer-to-peer abuse. Obviously, we want kids keeping their bodies to themselves. There should be no hitting, no pushing, but we also need some boundaries around words, especially because children are more likely to be disrespectful to a fellow student than to an adult. Obviously, kids joke, but when they're being truly hurtful or disrespectful, or when you can tell the other kid is not having fun with it, call them out on it. This is part of creating clarity. Kids need to know that they are expected to use their words wisely, and kids likewise need to know that they don't deserve to be spoken to unkindly, and someone will do something about it. When kids do have conflicts, and they will, you can help by listening calmly and neutrally to both kids, identifying the underlying issue, and encouraging empathy. If it escalates, get the teacher involved and work with them afterwards to fill out an incident report so we can spot trends and problems. Even if you feel like it resolved well, always do report back to the teacher. Just like we have the boundary of never having an adult alone with a child, we also have a boundary of never having two kids alone with each other. In addition, children are not allowed in places where they can't be seen by adults, with the exception, of course, of the bathroom, even if there are other people in the room. So, for instance, they shouldn't be going into a corner behind a bookshelf or play structure. They shouldn't be going into the closet. Very bluntly, child-on-child sexual abuse often occurs right under the watchful eye of caring adults, as long as they can find a place where that eye can't see them. This is also why we have some important bathroom boundaries. If you need to use the bathroom and it's a multi-stall bathroom, check that there are no kids in there first and then go in and close the outer door. If you bring kids on a trip to the bathroom, make sure before you send them in that there aren't kids from other age groups in the bathroom. Unfortunately, the power differential that comes with age difference is a risk factor for abuse. And if it's a multi-stall bathroom, leave the outer door open and check in verbally as needed. Lastly, any sexual interaction between children should be redirected, even if it seems like it's just innocent curiosity, and it should be reported to staff immediately. Again, you don't have to scare the kids. You can say, okay, let's keep our bodies to ourselves, or hey, that's not something we talk about here, and redirect it without it feeling punitive. But it's really, really important not to ignore it, and to let us know immediately so we can ensure the safety of all the kids here. That brings us to the broader topic of safety. There are, of course, obvious rules like no running in the hallways, no roughhousing. We particularly need to keep an eye out for safety when our groups are playing outdoors or in the gym. It really helps us if you're around the edges of the space to help enforce the rules and keep an eye out. That way you can ensure that kids aren't leaving unaccompanied and unknown adults aren't entering. You can retrieve balls that are out of bounds, and you can intervene when there are squabbles. We love it when you join in the games when you can, but even if you're not dressed for it or not up for playing, please be stationed around the edge and have your attention on the kids and their safety. This is a really easy time for us as adults to clump together and start chatting, but that leaves staff with the burden of supervising the whole area without help. So resist the urge to clump together and be attentive to what and how our kids are doing. As for specific outdoor and gym space rules, they're fairly basic. If an animal comes by, don't touch it, even if it's cute and we're 7 and all we want to do is pick it up. If we're outside and a kid needs to go in, they should always be accompanied in. And again, that's by more than one person. In the gym, no one should ever be climbing on or under or behind the bleachers. Kids can sit on the first 2 rows. The rest of it, there's no good reason for them to be on it. They also shouldn't be on the stage or podium area. In general, they should stick to the gym floor. Outside at our Chestnut Street site, the playing space ends at the bushes and they can only go through the gate when the teacher lets them through. Outside at Summer Street, no one should be running on the deck or playing with the statue. If you're ever not sure where out of bounds is or what the rules are, ask a teacher, especially before saying yes to something. What about keeping kids safe outside of the program? Now, of course, we don't see the kids outside the program because that's one of our boundaries, but sometimes they come into the program and we can kind of see some of the things they're facing outside. For instance, sometimes a kid comes in crying because of something that happened on the bus. That's something to pay attention to and discuss with a staff person because we're able to loop in with parents and teachers to make sure their kids aren't being bullied. Very importantly, if you suspect a child is facing abuse at home, report to staff immediately. If you hear that they're experiencing bullying or inappropriate behavior at school, report that to staff immediately as well. Obviously, don't freak the kid out by jumping up and running over to the teacher as soon as they've shared something personal with you. But at the very latest, before you leave for the day, tell your classroom lead or site supervisor because we are required by law to follow up on possible abuse. You don't need to be sure, you don't need to investigate or determine the reliability of what you're hearing, and please don't go directly to the child's parents because that's going to cause a lot more complication for the people who are tasked with investigating. If you have any reason to suspect that abuse is going on, report it. Thanks for joining us to talk about boundaries and safety. I know it's a lot to digest, so take a break and then come on back and join us for our 3rd and final installment where we go through some scenarios to practice everything we've been talking about.